Our next speaker is Michele Loi. He is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Zurich. He has a PhD in political theory and 8 years of postdoctoral research, some of which transdisciplinary at the intersection of political philosophy, bioethics, and data ethics. The title of his talk is A Comparative Assessment and Synthesis of 20 Ethics Codes on AI and Big Data. Currently, more than 80 codes exist for handling ethical risks of artificial intelligence and big data. Michele will present his findings from analyzing these codes with respect to where these codes converge and where they differ. Michele, welcome. You have 15 minutes for the presentation, followed by 5 minutes of Q&A.
Now, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
So I have some echo, so I will lower the volume here. Please use text if you have a problem hearing, okay?
We hear you well, so you can go ahead.
So, how many minutes do I have? Can you remind me?
15 minutes for the presentation, followed by a Q&A session. So in total, 20 minutes.
It will be a time warning.
Give you a time warning 3 minutes before your end of your 15 minutes presentation time. So I'll give you, when you have 3 minutes, I'll tell you.
So, maybe it's good to spend some words on the background of this paper, how it came about. So in the context of the Data Service Alliance, we are working on an ethics code for AI. And we started actually by polling knowledge from participants from both academia and industry in the organization about things that are important that should be done. And in the first version of this code, we didn't have a moral framework. So in order to have a moral framework, we wanted to see what others had done. And as we started analyzing some ethical codes, also there was the publication of this article by Jomin, Jenke, and Vallena, our colleagues at the Polytechnic, ETH Zurich, that had examined more than 80 codes. So there were so many codes we didn't even realize they existed. And in a way, they had done a lot of the important work, but we also realized that we couldn't just make direct use of their work. In the work by Jobin, Jenke, and Vallena, the analysis of values of other ethics codes ends up with a list of 11 codes. And because in our project, we wanted to specify for every stage of the data pipeline, what are the implications of the values? That turned out to be really just unpractical. 11 different values for every stage of the data pipeline, very, very complex. So we wanted to have something that was a bit similar. And an attempt to do something simpler was Floridi and Cole's paper, which is very near to the tradition of bioethics that involves these 4 main values. And they added basically a fifth, saying this fifth value, explainability, is the relevant value for AI, the additional value, plus the 4 values of bioethics. So this was the state of art, so to say. And then we also realized, based on our, I had started examining these 20 codes, that's something that immediately strikes your attention if you look carefully. And this is the fact that very often the same requirements or recommendations are filed under different values. So I started to ask myself, how can that be? So to make some examples, for instance, measuring the bias in the model, it can appear under fairness, but it can also appear under transparency. Explainability can appear under transparency, but it can also appear as accountability or even trustworthiness. So what is happening here? And I think we can actually explain this. I mean, my hypothesis is that, first of all, fairness and transparency are different kinds of values. So you want to be transparent about fairness because you think that this transparency helps achieving fairness. So you measure the bias for fairness, and then you want to be transparent about it for fairness, not the other way around. So it seems that the value of transparency is a bit more, to say, instrumental compared to fairness. And then let's think about the other example, right, of explainability. Is it a matter of transparency, of accountability, of responsibility, of trustworthiness? One thing you realize, especially when reading guidelines on transparency and accountability, is that they often share a common core. And now I'd like to share my screen because I think that the picture, as it happens, is better than many words. So let me do screen sharing. And I want to share this. No, this is not the right one, sorry. So why is it showing that one? Let's just unshare the screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Now you should see the slides. Good. So what we see is a situation like this. Situation in which we have the value of transparency and the value of accountability involve a common core of knowledge, sorry, put it here, common core of activities involving knowledge, documenting, and controlling. So if you want to be transparent about bias, you must know the bias, for instance, and you must document it. And of course, you can't be accountable for something that you don't even control. And so the hypothesis, we can't say really the discovery because it's not an empirical approach, it's an a priori analytical approach. So the hypothesis is that there is a common core concept referring to actions and procedures of knowing, documenting, and controlling that is to some extent independent from transparency and accountability. And we decided to call this control because it seems that control is the most important element here. Is you want to know what the algorithm does, you want to document it because you want to control it. And then it's interesting if you look at a paper by Yang, by Jobin and his colleagues, that control actually doesn't appear as a value. Not only it's not a value among the 11 values, but it's not even a value in the analysis, at least in the paper. It only appears in relation to control of information, to privacy. That's the only section of their paper where control appears. And this is a bit strange also because control, in the sense of meaningful human controls, plays an important role in discussion about autonomous systems, not so much in the machine learning. So we decided to consider these as control, and then to explain accountability basically as what results from control when you also assign responsibility, and transparency as what results from control when you add adequate communication to external stakeholders. Now, what about Chaubin and colleagues? Were they right not to include control? Maybe one argument for that is that actually control is always an element in accountability and transparency, but it is not the case, because we can imagine a company that wants to have control, wants to know what the algorithms are doing, wants to know the bias and so on, for the sake of improving the product, not necessarily because it wants to be transparent to external stakeholders. Maybe it doesn't want to be transparent about that. And it also doesn't have necessarily to be connected to control, to accountability. Maybe there is no issue about who's got the responsibility that is clear anyway, or maybe they don't want to be clear about that, but they want to improve the algorithm. So we think that control is one of the values, procedural values that emerges. It's procedural, so of course control is not control for control's sake, but often we can say that about accountability and transparency as well. We care about those values because we care about other values. So now, if we look back again at the work by our colleagues, we can see that it maps into the four principles of bioethics. It can be mapped. There is always a little bit of forcing here, but the idea was to follow here the example by Floridi and Coles in using the most established framework as a basis. And that also has pragmatic value because the four principle bioethics has been used by bioethicists for 60, 70, 70 years probably. So ethicists are very, applied ethicists are very much accustomed to it as well as to its problems. And so we think that of the 11 values in Chaubin et al., we can map justice and fairness, of course, that's justice, non-maleficence is there, privacy. So you see there are certain values like privacy that you can, I think, with as much reason include them in non-maleficence and autonomy. Privacy is important for protecting individuals from harm. It's also important to enable them to make choices. And also some people conceive privacy as control of information, which is a form of autonomy.
Michele, just to let you know that you have 3 more minutes now to talk.
So I think that when you're building your code, in a sense, you can decide. In the code for the Data Service Alliance, we decided to include privacy in autonomy for the sake of simplicity, for instance. Beneficence is one of the 4 values. Freedom and autonomy refers to autonomy. Trust is, again, a value that maybe can be associated with beneficence because trust is the lubricant of social interactions, so it facilitates the creation of goods. Trustworthiness, however, is probably more related to non-maleficence and control. Sustainability, we associate it to non-maleficence because sustainability is about not harming the environment in which you are. Dignity, we associate with autonomy, and solidarity, we associate with justice. So at the end, we get something like that. That's the framework we propose. So as you can see, it's a middle way between Floridi and Cole's framework that has the 4 principles of bioethics plus explainability, and the 11 principal framework of that emerges from the qualitative analysis of Jobin and others. And so we have these 7 values. The first 4 values are substantive in a sense. I mean, you can say that you make a better world by making people happier, by increasing well-being, and that's beneficence. You make a better world by not harming people. You make a better world in a different way by creating a space for human agency. And you make a better world by making the world more just. And when you do this, you actually have trade-offs. So these aren't one the instrument of the other. They usually they can be a trade-off. And then we supplement this classical framework with 3 procedural values that are also instrumental, and they can be connected actually to the other 4 in the sense that when you try, for instance, to be just, to be fair, you also want to control what you're doing, that you're doing an algorithm that can be fair. You want to be transparent by communicating this to the appropriate stakeholders, and you want to take responsibility for it. And in fact, it seems that most of the practical guidelines and directions given in ethics codes actually refers to these procedural actions related to the substantive ones. And this, in a way...
Michele, just to let you know that we have 3 more minutes.
I'm done. Yeah, that was the last sentence.
Awesome. Perfect timing then, no? So we have now some time for questions, if there are any questions from the stream. I was wondering myself, all these codes, do they come from different countries, the ones that you've analyzed, and whether you could say whether you see more countries interested in the topic of data ethics than others?
No, because I cannot say that, because I only analyzed a random selection of 20, and also we put a constraint. So as we were picking up ones, we decided to only use the English ones, and so I didn't have a detailed look at the difference, the geographical difference. It seems the difference that I noticed is much more, for instance, how you understanding AI. Are you understanding AI more as machine learning, so it's a problem of learning knowledge from data? That's like the discussion oriented by data science. Or are you thinking more about the problems of autonomous systems, like autonomous weapons and so on? Those kinds of codes tend to be quite different. The same is true of codes that, for instance, are written for politicians. Maybe they talk a lot about job replacement, well-being, or human rights at the level of freedom of expression, things like that. And codes that are actually written by companies for themselves or by groups of companies for companies. They also tend to differ a lot.
So if we zoom in now to Switzerland, where do you see what will happen in the long term to data ethics? What's your opinion on that?
I think that data ethics as a field needs to be deconstructed into a combination of researchers that are doing data bioethics or data economics and ethics, or data politics and ethics. Data ethics is too large an umbrella to even be coherent as a field. Rather, data are becoming so central that every field should say something about data, I think.
Yeah, I agree on that. So Michele, thanks for joining us also on so short notice today, and hope to see you again at the Swiss Data Science Conference.
you so much for inviting me, for selecting the paper, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Same. Bye bye. Thank you.